in the book of Esther. So I don't have the freedom to tell you about my day and about the craziness of my day. I'm going to share with you and finish up a story that's just as crazy as my day and probably your day. A story that makes you kind of go, huh? And so we're going to start out by recapping the story, then we're going to finish up the actual story part, and then next week I want to finish up and just kind of give my overview and my thoughts. So we are excited tonight, in case you haven't noticed. I am pumped up, ready to go for the book of Esther, hopefully to finish it. Got some exciting things. Okay, well, they're exciting on my part because I'm the one that's going to get to say it. But I am excited about bringing some application to the last little part of this book and the story in the book. There's more to the book that we're not going to cover all of it, but tonight we are excited to wrap up the actual story part of the book of Esther. So you're going to want to join us for that. I'm going to try really hard to not let any of the nonsense that I've had to see and watch and witness tonight and today interfere with telling you about the story of Esther. We probably will tie that in though. So we need to get started with some worship, get our mind set, get it focused on what it is that we're here for, because if you're like me, now all you want to know is why Andy's day was filled with nonsense, and you're not going to want to pay attention to Esther, and I need to get you refocused for that. So will you join with me as we allow Stephen to lead us in some worship?
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found, was blind, but now I see so clearly. Hallelujah, grace like rain is falling down on me. Hallelujah, all my stains are washed away. Hallelujah, grace like rain is falling down on me. Hallelujah, all my stains are washed away, washed away. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Hallelujah, grace like rain falling down on me. Hallelujah, all my stains are washed away. Hallelujah, grace like rain falling down on me. Hallelujah, all my stains are washed away, washed away. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing your praise than when we first begun. Hallelujah, grace like rains falling down on me. Hallelujah, all my stains are washed away. Yeah. Hallelujah, grace like rain falling down on me. Hallelujah, all my stains are washed away, washed away.
Oh, thank you, Stephen, for that way. And there is truth in that song, right? All my sins are washed away. Hallelujah. We are excited about that. We're excited about the fact that no matter what we've done, no matter where we've been, today, yesterday, or where we're going, Jesus has made a way for us to be forgiven. It's that whole idea of Jesus washing our feet. We accept him, what he has done for us, and he washes our feet. Where we've been, where we are, where we're going. And we're clean. And that's important. Hey, we're in the book of Esther. We're in chapter 7. We were there last week. We're there this week. I'm going to try to tie it all together, plus probably throw in some other views, some other thoughts, some other things that have to do with this. So we're going to get started. I want to review with you just really quickly. I want you to go back with me, and I want you to follow the timeline, right? The timeline says that there was a queen, and that queen told her king no, and that king got really upset. He said, all right, well, if you're going to say no, then you're gone. You're banished. You can no longer be the queen. And then his friends and family came up with a good idea that was taken by the king, which was, hey, listen, why don't you take all these beautiful women and have a beauty pageant? You pick the one that pleases you to be the next king. And the king really resisted. He said, hey, listen, this is a really bad idea. I don't want anything to do with a bunch of beautiful women. You know, like, listen, let me just do it the natural way, which is I will just find one on my own. No, he didn't say any of that. What he said was, hey, it sounds like a great idea to me, like any man would if you were a beauty pageant to find your wife. So he does that. We see the favor of God all over that, and he picks Esther. She pleases not only him, but she gets favor with those that are in tune with the king, right? So that she can win that favor. And then we see that in the midst of that, she has an uncle who also helps out with the king because he saves the king from an evil plot to take his life. In the midst of that, we have this little dilemma, this little problem, because we got this bad guy named Haman. And Haman wants everybody to recognize him as second in command, bow down, tell him he's great, tell him he's wonderful, you're the man Haman. But there's a problem because Mordecai isn't bowing the knee to anybody but his God. I should not have to go into a political moment to get you to understand the value of that. Mordecai says, not happening. Haman gets really mad, like any of us would, when we want people to bend to what it is that we want and how we think, right? And so he goes home to his family, really frustrated, comes up with this brilliant idea of, let's kill all the Jews, right? Goes to the king signs the edict. All the Jews on a certain day in the near future are going to be taken care of. People are going to be able to do whatever they want to the Jewish people. Mordecai finds out about this plot, right? And he goes to the queen and says, hey, listen, you better do something about this because probably you were put in this palace for such a time as this. Now, Esther could have very easily said, like, you got it all wrong. This was a beauty pageant. I won based on my looks. This has nothing to do with God wanting to use me because I know that God doesn't use beauty pageants. Matter of fact, he would never even want a woman to be in a beauty pageant. So listen, this has nothing to do with God. Nope. Instead, she didn't say that. And she looks at Mordecai and says, all right, listen, you go pray. I'll pray. And then I will go before the king. Because I know what happens here is the king's life is all about the king. And there's this little rule that says, hey, if you go before the king and you're uninvited, you lose your head. So she goes before the king and she earns favor, right, with the king. Now, she invites the king and Haman to a banquet where she's planning to expose the evil plan of Haman. On the way home from the banquet, Haman is in a great mood because just him and the king had a private audience with the queen. He sees Mordecai just by accident, which gets him all really upset. Mordecai still isn't bending the knee, and Haman goes to his family and pouts. His family comes up with a great idea. Why don't you make a bigger poll? And we'll just put Mordecai on it right now. Like, you go ask the king and you take care of it right now. And it delights Haman. He's very excited about taking the life of his enemy. Justice. Now tell me that this doesn't sound like the time period we are in. Justice and equality and bending a knee. All of these things are in the story. So, he's on his way to the king. He's going to make this happen, right? It's a very exciting time for him. And he gets in, and the king just happens to be awake. Couldn't sleep. So he was reading his history, like all of us do when we can't sleep. We go back through our day. It's not putting the king to sleep. Instead, he happens upon the story of Mordecai saving his life. And he asks what has been done. And the servants say, nothing. And the king says, well, this is not going to happen. Like, something needs to happen. So who happens to be out in the court? Well, it just happens to be Haman, who's there to take the life of Mordecai. The problem here is God and Haman aren't on the same page. God and the king, well, they're on the same page, right? And so the king says to Haman, what would you do to honor somebody that was really cool, that was really special, that deserved honor, right? And Haman thinks, he must be talking about me, because that happens in our workplace. I bet today you went to work and your boss, you think, spent the whole day thinking about just how lucky he is to have you as an employee. Just like how incredible of a worker you are. And he probably spent the whole day asking other people, hey, what would I do? What should I do to honor somebody? How should I take care of people? I spent today with a bunch of people around a round table throughout the day. Totally different people all throughout the day. And I spent the entire day thinking, man, how would I honor these people if I was me? And I did it. You know what I did? I said, I would sit around table with me. And so I allowed them to sit around the round table with me, fulfilling exactly what Haman thought. Here's the problem. The king and God are on a totally different page. Apparently, it wouldn't be okay to just sit around the round table spending time with me. God had a different plan. So he says to Mordecai and Haman, hey, here's what the plan's going to be. Haman, you take Mordecai around on a horse and a robe. Tell people this is what the king does for people who love the king, who serve the king, who do great things for the king. People the king loves, right? So it's an exciting story. So all of a sudden, Haman goes back to his family. And he's complaining and in dismay because of the fact that he had to do this. And now all of a sudden, those fair weather friends and family, they changed their whole tune. Oh, well, listen, if Mordecai's Jewish, you don't stand a chance. Now, where was that advice from the beginning? It wasn't anywhere from the beginning. And we talked about godly counsel. We talked about it is important, those who are sitting around you during the day. What are they counseling you in? What are they telling you? I got lots of counsel today at the table I was sitting in. Lots of people telling me lots of things. And so you look at that and say, that's important. Who you surround yourself is important. Before Haman can answer, before he can use his brain, think this whole thing through, knock on the door, and that's where we pick it up. He is now being rushed off to see the queen and the king. And I want to start again in chapter 1. It says this, so the king and Haman went to the Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. Now, listen, I told you right from the very beginning. So months ago, I told you in this book story, the reason the king's in trouble in the first place is because him and his buddies were drinking. And they were drinking, and when you're drinking, the ideas you come up with, they sound really great. Fantastic. You are the smartest guy, woman in the world. at that time. And so you come up with these great ideas. How about if we invite my wife to come in front of all these guys and do a little jig and tell us, show us how beautiful she is? It sounds like a brilliant idea. Ranks right up there with beauty pageants, right? Guys come up with these ideas when they're drinking. And so what happens now? The king's having some wine. He's relaxed. Everything's good. And what does he say? Ah, Queen Esther, what is your request? Why are we here? And then he says, what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. See, wine loosens up your pocketbook, I believe. It loosens up with what you want. Like, oh, I love you so much. What do you want? I'll give you anything you want. Right? So the king, working right into God's plan. What's God's plan? Save his people. What's the king's plan? Make the queen happy because the king's happy. Those are totally different plans, but notice, here's what God's going to do. He's going to use a completely selfish plan for his purposes. That's amazing, because you and I think the only way that God ever works is in these big, humongous, godly plans. Oh, it's all about God. You know that God works in selfish plans. He'll put you in the right place at the right time for the totally selfish reasons you have. I want to go shopping. God's like, good, go shopping. I got somebody for you to talk to. And God says, hey, I want this. I say I want this job because I want to make a lot of money. This guy said, I want this job because God's like, I want you to have the job because I want you to reach people, right? God is in a totally different state. God would allow your car to get a flat tire so the person that pulls over to help you, who's having a bad day, can have some help. That's what God does. And so here's the case. He's using a king who's got this real problem with having banquets, drinking wine, and then making these big requests, doing these things. And so again, here's what Esther says. Then Queen Esther answered, if I've found favor with you, your majesty, if it pleases you, grant me my life. Now that's a small little request now, isn't it? Hey, I don't want half the kingdom. What I want is, please, could you protect my life? Could you save my life? Imagine being the king who goes from the anticipation of getting this big ask, I want a dog, I want a horse, could you get me a cheetah or a lion? I need a new servant girl, right? To all of a sudden, no, what I'd really like to do is live. That request hits home for you and I, because there are times where people who 5 minutes before they walk into the doctor's office, if you were to say to them, what do you really want in life? I want a new job, I want a new car, I want more kids, I want more of this, I want more of that. They go into the doctor's office and they walk out, and what they say to you and I is, I'd really like to live longer. I'd like to have some more time. I'd like to have some more life. It's amazing how it changes. We walk into work complaining about our job. We find out we're being laid off or we're being fired off, and all we want is a job. Is it funny how the very boss that we're dismissing, right, that we despise, all of a sudden we do anything to work for him. We want our job back. Life changes like that. So the king is hit with this halfway through this request. I want to save my life, for I and my people have been sold and destroyed, killed and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. Look at that. You see that? Hey, listen, if it had just been about me no longer being the queen and me becoming a servant and me being taken away, like I wouldn't even bother you. But this is a life or death thing. It brings up the question, do you know when to bother people? Do you know when to ask requests of people? Do you look at it and say, man, this is not a life or death request, so it can probably wait? This is a request that says, I'd really like to not be a prisoner. I'd like to not be a slave anymore. I'd like to not be these things. But there are requests that are really super urgent in nature. And God seems to be able to sift through all of it and know when and where and how to grant. He does it perfectly every time. And our sense of urgency is not always his sense of urgency. You know, sometimes we're sitting around waiting for justice. And God says, not time. It's not the right time right this second. And God says, I know you want justice, but I care about this person's eternal destination. Do you know that we just can't wait for people to get in jail? For people to get what they deserve. God's saying, I don't want you to get what you deserve. Do you know how many times you and I are totally on the different page than God? We're working completely against God. And so when we wonder why justice isn't happening when we want it, we're looking at it totally different. God's not looking at how bad you are. God's looking at the fact that your badness is keeping you from Him, and He wants to fix it. You and I have no desire to fix the badness of people. We want the badness of people to make it so that they can get what they deserve. When you look at people and you say, I don't want anything to do with your restoration process, I just hope it's really long and really hard, you got a real problem because you're not Christ-like. Because Christ isn't looking at you and saying, I don't really want anything to do with restoring you to the Father, and I hope that hell is really long and really hot. Like, imagine if Jesus treated us that way. And so this king, all of a sudden, is faced with this, whoa, wait a second. So here's his response. King Xerxes asks Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. Tell me who is doing this. Who's threatening you? Who is it that's standing in between you and me? Who's going to do this? Now, again, look at the neatness of this story, the way it puts. You've got Haman at the beginning of this, who's whining to his parents, or to his wife and to his family, right? And his wife says, and his family says, listen, you're not going to be able to fight this. And he's all of a sudden whisked away with that thought process. God's going to intervene and take care of his people. And nobody had told that to Haman when he came up with the great plan of destroying them all. But instead, now they're like, hey, oh, by the way, this isn't going to work. We told you to make the bigger pole. We told you to come up with this plan, but it's not going to work. Congratulations. We talked about it last week. Haman would have never gone to this banquet had he been thinking, but he wasn't thinking straight. And a little bit of wine probably didn't help with that. So imagine Haman as all of a sudden this story unravels, and all of a sudden Esther's telling the king about this request. Do you think there's a moment where Haman recognizes and says, wait a minute, I'm putting 2 and 2 together, and this time I'm actually going to come up with 4, and this is a problem? Or do you think that Haman's putting 2 and 2 together and coming up with 3? Somebody else, I don't know. Who would be doing this? Can you imagine? Probably Haman is upset as well. He probably starts off going, who would do this? Who would do this to this poor lady? Like, nobody would do this. So the king asks the obvious question, because Esther, she didn't accuse anybody. She just lays it out there. Please save my life. And so the king says, who's taking it? And then here's her response. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, right? Who is he? Where is he? The man who dared to do such a thing. And Esther said, and here's where all of a sudden the noose comes around the neck of Haman, and he got him, and he's not going to get out of this, right? Because Queen Esther said, an adversary and an enemy. So she still doesn't name him. This makes it really clear. This guy is against me and against my people. And then she tightens the noose and says, this vile Haman. Now, can you imagine Haman, right? Can you imagine the look on his face? Can you imagine his eyes? Can you imagine his body language going from, well, I got invited to this banquet, to all of a sudden, the words that were told to him before the banquet are now going to come true, right? How all of a sudden Haman realizes God just orchestrated all this. Can you imagine? Hopefully God goes, let's do a little rewind. Let Andy Flood review for you how this all worked. And you take my review from the very beginning and you play it for Haman. Hey, look at how God pieced all this together. Isn't that kind of neat? While your family was telling you to go ask the king to hurry up this process, God was intervening and saying, hey, king, why don't you review your history for this day? And find out that, oh, by the way, somebody took your life. Somebody wanted to take your life, right? So Haman all of a sudden gets it. So here's the response, right? So then it says, then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. That's an understatement. The king got up in rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. Now, I would like you to go back to the beginning of the story. What if the king had, in his rage, left the wine and the palace and gone out and thought for a second? Right? Then maybe we wouldn't be in this whole boat, but probably then salvation for the Jews would have come a different way. This time the king, he leaves the wine. He goes out to do some thinking, right? He went out into the palace garden. But Haman, right, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Now, again, I don't know where you fall in this story, and I don't know how you handle moments like this, but all of us have been in a Haman moment. We've been caught, right? We've been caught in something we've done. It's a lie, it's an action, it's words, it's a thought process, it's whatever it is, we're caught. And at that moment, what do? If you're like me, you're a reactionist in nature, and then you're a severe people pleaser in nature, you immediately try to fix it. You have conversations, you do things you shouldn't do because it's just going to make things worse. Because you're willing to say anything that you need to make this all go away. So Haman, when the king exited, I think the appropriate strategy would have been exit. Find the nearest horse, donkey, cow, whatever it is, get on it and go away. Right? But not Haman. He's going to talk his way out of it. Now again, I probably would have ended up doing the same thing because I'm a people pleaser, right? But he's talking all of a sudden to the queen who just called him vile, who just called him an adversary and an enemy. That doesn't sound like somebody who you really want to talk to or that who's really going to listen to you, especially if you know that her God has been fighting for you, right? For her against you. So we get this whole scene. Haman picked a side, decided it would be better to go to the queen, beg for his life. Notice, not begging for his job, not begging for anything. He's doing the same thing that Queen Esther did. So, according to proper justice, right, the idea here would be what? The queen would be like, I get it, Haman. I just begged for my life, and I need to now let you beg for your life. It should be all okay. You deserve the same treatment that I would be treated. So that would be justice, would it not? Be like, hey, we fixed this whole thing, a life for a life. You know, we got it all taken care of. But justice doesn't work out the way that you and I think, because God is not beholden to human justice. God is beholden to his justice. He is by definition justice. He looks at a situation and it's perfect justice. Perfect for one side, perfect for the other side. Over and over in the Old Testament, God says, if my people will just turn, if they'll just repent, they will avoid all of this. Now, what kind of justice is there in the fact that you can treat God poorly, walk away from God, spit all over him, serve other idols, do all that stuff, and he says, hey, but if you turn and come back to me, you can avoid the consequences. None of us would agree that that's justice, but in God's eyes, well, that's justice. So we look at it and we need to say right from the beginning, our idea of justice and his are not the same. So in this uber world of justice right now, whose justice are you seeking? Yours? Somebody else's? Are you serving a God? God wants you to do justly, but justly according to him, not according to all those voices around you. Certainly not according to me. My justice is taking God's principles and stuff and intermixing it with a selfishness and saying, hey, here's how I would apply it if I am God. Once in a while, I actually get it right, and I am Christ-like in nature, right? And we end up treating somebody justly. So here's the scene. Let's finish this up. Well, just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. So you get this whole picture of Haman begging, right? Begging Esther. Now the king's coming back in. We don't know what the king has decided. He might have said, listen, Haman, I understand this is all a big misunderstanding. You've been a loyal servant, and I'm going to help you out with this whole thing. Let's fix this whole thing, right? He may have been there. But as he walks in, what's the visual he sees? Haman falling on the couch on the queen. Now, I am just goofy enough to think that an angel of the Lord went behind Haman and went, whoops, and touched his back, and Haman did a belly flap onto the couch with Esther. Like, that's how I think. I think God probably was like, justice. Let's seal the deal here. Boom. All right? But whatever the case, whether Haman just had a whoops moment, whether he fell, he didn't have a good night in any way, shape, or form. And so he's begging for his life, and then the king walks in and sees him on top of the queen. So here's what the king says. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, I'm betting it wasn't a very soft exclamation, right? He exclaims this, will he even molest the queen as she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, it covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a pole reaching a height of 50 cubits stands in Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole, and he had it set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. I want you to know, this is a reactionary king just like me. Like when he reacts, it's just like, boom, here it is. And Haman probably knew that. So let's wrap this up, right? Haman wasn't coming up against Esther. He didn't have a clue that Esther was Jewish. Neither did the king, or he probably would have never signed the edict, right? So Haman was coming up against Mordecai. He got so caught up in a cause. So got caught up in the cause of somebody bowing to him. Somebody worshiping him. Somebody telling him that he was great. Somebody making him feel good. So before you say, I would never do that, you might want to take a look at how you treat people at work. How you treat people in your home. How you treat people where? Anywhere you go. Do you walk in a place and want people to say, you're so beautiful. You're so handsome. You're the greatest. You're the best. Right? You're the most awesome. I would never listen to any other pastor in Oklahoma. I would listen to you, Andy. You're the greatest. Right? It doesn't matter. We all have been there. We want people to say to us, you're just the greatest. And we want to force them to do that. And we think we can do that through title, position, authority, whatever it is, influence. We just want people to tell us how great we are, how great we look, how great we cook, how great we smell, how great anything. I love it when my nieces think that I'm the greatest horseman that's ever been created, even though that is so untrue. It's not funny, right? I'm one step ahead of them. But we love that. And that brings about irrationality. And you and I, we get irrational. And in our desire to have people worship us, we cross a line because God doesn't want people to think you're the greatest cook in the world. He wants people to think you serve the greatest cook in the world. That's what he cares about. So while people are thinking you're the greatest pastor, there's no one like you. You've just stolen his chorus, his song. There's no God like you, Jehovah. That's you. You're the only God like this. That's what he wants from you and I. And we get in the way all the time. You're the greatest author. You're the greatest movie person. You're the greatest athlete. You're the greatest whatever. And we get irrational. And we stop thinking. And then we get mad at people. And we want them to be impaled. We want their head on a stick. Why? Because they refuse to say that we're the greatest. Right? Next week I want to wrap up some of those ideas and some of those thoughts. But when we serve and we get irrational, we end up like Haman. Look at where this goes. Look at how God intervenes. It is unreal. What do you want, Queen Esther? Up to half the kingdom. Do you think the king had to say that? He could have just said, thanks for the food. Thanks for the grub. We're done. But instead he says, hey, what is it that you want? She says, I want my life. That puts the king on high alert. Who's the guy? Who is he that's going to steal your life? It's this vile adversary Haman that puts the king in an awful place. Because the king has Haman as a second in charge. And so now all of a sudden the king's got to think this thing through. And so he goes out. And he goes out to think this thing through. And what does Haman do? Haman pleads with the wrong person. Haman should have been pleading with God for his life. Hey, Esther, who's this God you serve? Can I please have his phone number right now? Should have been his request. Instead, what's his request? I'm going to beg Esther. That allowed him to be in a position to take a little fall. He'd already taken a big fall for the record. And now he takes the last little bit of that fall and he ends up where? At the feet of Esther. He ends up at the feet of the person he would have tried to kill. It's kind of ironic. And while there, the king just happens to pick out of all the moments he could have walked back in the room. King could have taken one more minute of walking and would have been fine. But he walks in at just the right time, and what happens? He sees this whole thing. And what does he put in his head? In his head, 2 plus 2 equals 5. In his head, what happens? Well, he must be wanting to molest my wife. No, like, you think that that was on Haman's mind. I'm just going to do one more thing before I die. You know, like, hey, listen, I couldn't kill you, so I'll molest you. Like, no way. But we think that all the time. Constantly, we're looking at people, and we think they're thinking, when they're not thinking at all, they're reacting. Haman was trying to save his life. And then the king says, oh, man, you're a terrible person. But notice, the story doesn't end there because some guy, some eunuch, just happens to be standing there who just happens to have some pretty key information. Hey, by the way, let me tell you about Haman. Haman was trying to do this. Isn't it amazing how God reveals things and who he reveals them through? Just the right time, somebody comes forward and says, let me tell you about the conversation I had with this person. Let me tell you about the lunchroom table conversation that we have. Let me tell you about this. And so what does the king do? The king says, oh, I take him out, put him on it. And then what's it say? Just like we go right back to chapter 1. What happens once the king gets rid of the king? Oh, in chapter 2 it starts off by saying, well, his fury resided. Right? All of a sudden he gets less angry. So the king is this kind of king who says, when an action happens, I'm going to respond to it, but I'm not so angry anymore because something happened. So listen, I think hopefully tonight I've made this semi-relevant. You and I are all over in this story. We've all been Esther. Some of us just look a little better at being Esther than others. We've all been Haman. Well, we end up being the bad guy. We've all been the king, where we've had the power to do all kinds of things. We've all been the eunuch who adds to the fire. Hey, here's a little more. We've all been the family and friends of Haman who say, oh, here's truth now. Right? We've all been in this story. Next week, I want to go through and I want to just pick out some of these places and really challenge you. Where have you seen? Do you see yourself here? Do you see yourself here? What happens? We're going to finish up with the chapter, and we're going to look at the fact that the king puts out a new edict, and we're going to see how God's salvation wraps up everything. And then we're going to be done with the book of Esther. It is a super practical book where you can find yourself somewhere in the story, and it is so relevant to today, where justice, equality, IOUs, all kinds of things from the past, from the present, from the future come into play all the time. How we handle them, how we react to them, what happens. It matters. Sometimes we need to take a little walk in the garden, look things over. Sometimes we need to let things rest. Sometimes we need to not make a bad situation 10 times worse by falling upon a queen. There's all kinds of times that we are in this story. So I hope tonight that you've gotten something out of this. It would be fantastic if you would send me a comment that says that you actually learned something from this, which would be great for upcoming things. For Lakeview Community Church people, man, we're so looking forward to eventually getting back to do this live and together. I want to remind you that Summer has started a Wednesday night Bible study that you are welcome to attend. You just need to ask her directions to her house. She would be happy to have you attend. You could do it live and in person. We're going to continue doing this. After next week, we got a brand new study that we're going to be doing. I'm open for suggestions. If there's something that you would really like me to do, that would be fantastic as well. Let me pray for you so that my son can go get some homework done. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for this time. Thank you for the story. Lord, I thank you for the passion of this story. I thank you that your fingerprints are all over this story. Man, you use beauty pageants. You use all kinds of things to get people in the right place at the right time for the right reason, which is always your reason. Lord, we pray that you would speak into our lives. Help us to see what you're doing. Help us to know that when we don't see what you're doing, that you're actually doing something. In your name, amen. Hey, have a fantastic evening. We'll see you tomorrow night for Nightly Nonsense, where I may have something to say about the day of which I just went through. Talk to you soon.